Wife cheated on me with my boss slash her college ex. The fallout was glorious. I was with Mel for 7 years, married for 3 when it went to hell a few years ago. Mel was intelligent, beautiful, and kind. A woman at one time I wanted to build a family with and spend the rest of my life with. She still is intelligent and physically attractive. I eventually discovered that she has a rotten soul. I will forever be grateful to the prenup my dad recommended and that my former state considers inherited assets separate from marital ones. And I thank whatever higher power is out there that we never had kids. It all began 6 months before what I now call the reckoning. We had gone to a party my now former company threw. I am an engineer working on power infrastructure. She worked in finance, though she might still be doing that. I really don't know or care. Anyway, also in attendance was Kyle, then 34M. Smug asshole who got to his position, overseeing a project that I worked on through a toxic mix of charming the right people and a dash of nepotism, with his uncle being my company's CFO. He was also Mel's boyfriend from college. They wound up talking most of the evening until we left. I should have known something was off because Mel was not in the mood before going to bed, despite earlier promising some fun times before we had gone to the party. That was the beginning of our downward slide that ended in divorce. We only had sex once during this 6-month journey of misery, and that was only 3 weeks into it. By month 2, we barely kissed. By month 3, she would turn her head and offer her cheek if I went to kiss her. Of course, by then I already knew and had evidence, but I was still playing the dutiful yet clueless husband until I was ready. She still said the right things: love, children, how she longed for me when I was away. But there was no action behind those words. Speaking of me being away, after the party, Kyle became even more insufferable, especially towards me. He dropped hints on everything from reminding me that he's in charge to how incompetent I am. I'm not. To the big one, reminiscing about his college relationship with my wife. Mostly he liked to send me on trips. Now our project had a lot of travel requirements. We planned to spread them out among the team. Kyle overruled that and sent me on every trip, which was every other week at points and weekending over a few times. When I was back, he liked to throw extra tasks to keep me late. It was on the second trip, 5 months from the reckoning, that I met a guy, Randall, who had been part of Kyle and Mel's college friend group, but was no longer in touch with them. He told me that they were closer than I thought and that they had seriously discussed marriage. It didn't work because Kyle was a year ahead and he took an overseas job after graduation. Now, Mel's romantic past before we met was her business and I normally wouldn't pry. But when that romantic past was now my supervisor who took a delight in making my life miserable, it became my business. On a rare day off at home, I purchased some discreet cameras and placed them in corners of the house, installed by a friend of my brother's who was police and specialized in surveillance. We connected them to existing wires so they remained powered without visible plugs. I even got a special router for them that would not pop up on anyone's phone or laptop unless they had a special app that existed only on my laptop, and I always took mine with me. Paranoid? Sure, but just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't after you. Illegal? Not according to my lawyer, Margaret, an experienced attorney who had seen nearly everything. Here's where my mention of inherited assets comes in. My house was once owned by my paternal grandfather, who owned a number of houses as rental properties and died a wealthy man. He left each of his grandkids, me, my brother, my sister, and our 2 cousins, a property and a small trust fund to make any repairs or upgrades. I took possession a year before Mel and I were engaged. Her name was never on the deed and she never contributed anything beyond her share of utilities. Sure enough, while I was away on the next trip, Kyle came over and he and Mel were having an affair. She did things to him and let him do things to her that she never would with me, even when our sex life was at its most passionate. As much as I wanted to confront them, and I sure as hell did, I knew going in angry would not end well for me. So, I took a few breaths and began to plan. Evidence. I needed evidence of the affair, of Kyle's harassment, of anything that would make their lives miserable. Thanks to the hidden cameras, I had explicit proof of their affair, but I needed more. Margaret put me in touch with Max, a PI who was former FBI. On the times I weekended over, and there were several of those times, Max would follow them on their weekend trips to various places, gathering more evidence of their trysts and, more importantly, Kyle's use of a company card to cover everything. Allies. I also recruited my colleagues to start documenting Kyle while I was out of the office. They needed little prodding from me since he was a dick to them. Only difference is, he wasn't fucking their spouses. It took a couple of months, but they found out that he was engaged in some dealings that could get him in very hot water. Turns out that was only the beginning. Remember his CFO uncle? He and a few senior executives knew exactly what Kyle was doing because he was doing these illicit deals at their bidding. I turned over what my colleagues found to Margaret and Max. If these actions meant what I thought they meant, it means that a bunch of people would go down and take the company with them. And giving that, Margaret meant that she was going to have to turn this over to the feds, though she said she could hold off until more evidence was acquired. Exit. I did not let these trips go to waste. In addition to doing my job, I began networking. Even without the knowledge of a pending Enron, I knew that I was on borrowed time with that company as long as Kyle was there and fucking Mel. So while on these trips, I began dropping subtle hints that I was looking for new opportunities. Thankfully, my field is a small community and I already had some connections to other companies that were looking for people with my expertise. Daniel was the one who offered the best deal. He worked for a multinational that had major projects in several countries, projects that had trouble recruiting people with my experience and were willing to pay a lot. I interviewed with them 2 months before the reckoning for a series of projects across Africa with a home base near Cape Town. A month later, an offer was made and accepted. They also agreed to a delayed start date so I could prepare for the move. Best part was that Daniel provided some final evidence, communications from Kyle's uncle to Daniel's bosses that confirmed some of the worst allegations. His bosses were not interested and were planning to talk to the feds themselves. I sent the copies to Margaret. I also gave my colleagues a heads up about me leaving, which they took as a sign to look for the door themselves. Allison. I met her about 2 months into this mess on my frequent travels and would regularly meet her when I was in her city, which was often. She was also an engineer and turned out that she worked for Kyle at his previous company when she was fresh out of college. They dated, and when she became pregnant with his daughter, Callie, he dropped her and hired some slick lawyers to get out of paying anything except the bare minimum in child support and give up any parental rights. Allison had thought about going for more, but ultimately decided not to because she did not want him anywhere near her daughter. Yes, she hated him more than I did. 6 months from that party was go time. I had plenty of evidence of adultery and corporate malfeasance. I had a new overseas job waiting for me, and Allison and I had become close. We hadn't done anything romantic. I wanted to wait until the separation was official. It was a Friday when I took the first step. It was a rare day at home, and I managed to take that Friday off. Once Mel left for work, I spent most of the morning and early afternoon packing all of her clothes and personal possessions. A locksmith had come over to change the locks. By mid-afternoon, I got a text from Margaret that Mel had been served with the request for separation and the divorce filing. No evidence of her and Kyle's affair was part of that package. That would come later. Sure enough, Mel came home and showed more emotion towards me than she had in months. I sat on the porch with a whiskey in hand and the boxes in front of me. She demanded to know what was going. How could I do this? We need to talk and work through this. Sure, babe, I thought, but didn't say. I pointed to the boxes and said, we'll talk through lawyers. She collected the boxes and shoved them into her car before leaving. That was the first peaceful weekend I had in months. I grilled a nice thick steak and paired it with some high-end scotch. I also called key people like my siblings and parents to tell them what happened. My parents knew there was trouble, but I kept the explicit details from them. My brother and sister knew what Mel had done and were glad I pulled the divorce trigger. I also called Allison. She was happy for me, but she warned that Kyle may try something. I was counting on it, and it came Monday morning. I figured she ran to Kyle when left and told him about the divorce. After a couple of hours in the office preparing to wrap my job up, I was summoned into a small conference room where Kyle, smug as ever, was waiting with an HR executive. It began with how management, meaning Kyle, had serious concerns about my performance. I was presented a document that they wanted me to sign to acknowledge my poor performance and I would be demoted with a decrease in pay. I skimmed it, then tore it in two. Kyle and the HR rep were openly shocked. I took out a tablet and Bluetooth speaker and played a small file. It was in my living room where Kyle and Mel, clearly visible, were making out. During their session, Kyle admitted that he had been giving me extra work and sent me out of town so they could have alone time. The HR rep's face froze. Kyle was no longer as smug, though probably thinking adultery alone would not damage him. I then handed the rep the evidence of Kyle using the company card, charged to company accounts, for romantic getaways with Mel. Now Kyle was worried. I gathered my devices and told the rep I was going to take a couple of weeks of accumulated travel PTO and my lawyer would be in touch. The aftermath. I spent the next couple of weeks packing up and getting ready for my move to Cape Town. I was only taking my clothes and a few personal items. I sold off my furniture and donated what couldn't sell. The surveillance expert came and took out all of his stuff. I didn't sell the house, but I was going to rent it out. The last time I saw Mel was in Margaret's conference room. She decided not to contest the divorce, but she wanted a payday. Half my retirement, the house, and alimony. Despite that, she actually made more money than I did. The prenup we signed protected both our assets. Mel tried to argue it was signed under duress, but we had confirmation from her lawyers at the time who had confirmed it was a fair agreement. Then we showed our evidence of the adultery. First were the photos from Max with them going to hotels, then some of the videos. I deliberately chose some of the more explicit to make a point. Mel agreed to a clean divorce. Part of me wanted to drag it out, punish her. But after 6 months of this, I wanted to be done. We did have a private moment afterwards. I asked why she cheated, why she betrayed me. She said that she did love me, but Kyle coming back into her life reawakened their feelings. She wanted to tell me sooner, but couldn't bring herself to do so. I laughed, then told her that her true love abandoned his daughter and was about to go through some things. That was the last time I ever spoke to her. Kyle had it worse. He was already in trouble because of the corporate card. When the feds showed up, he was led out in handcuffs. Now, Weil was an arrogant asshole, he wasn't stupid. When pressed on his illegal deals, he sold out the corporate masterminds, including his uncle. Ultimately, the company was brought down by their actions. It was acquired by a competitor on the cheap. Thankfully, my old colleagues got out in time. Kyle managed to avoid jail time thanks to his testimony, but he would never work corporate again. Last I heard, he was in a new state at a rural high school where he taught and coached.